and resources through a collaborative knowledge base. If you'd like more information about the work of Northwest Heat, we invite you to visit northwestheat.org. You will find recordings from the first 4 sessions in this series, and you can register for our final session. You can also communicate with us through the poll that we will share at the end of this session. Before we introduce our presenter, we will take a moment to share a few housekeeping details. This session includes a chat, which means you can submit questions to our presenter throughout the session. There will be a Q&A at the end of this session, but you can also use the raise hand in the React menu, or you can even unmute your mic to ask a question during the presentation. This session includes captioning. You will find instructions in our Zoom chat on how to access the captioning. And this session is being recorded. The video will be shared at northwestheat.org. Our presenter for the Document Accessibility Workshop Series is Michele Joy Bromley, Manager of Digital Accessibility and Content in the Office of Information Technology at Portland State University. And now we'll turn it over to Michele for the presentation.
Thank you, Gloria. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Get situated here. Alrighty. Good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Michele Joy Bromley. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a digital accessibility and inclusivity specialist with over 15 years of experience in accessible design and remediation. I am likewise certified through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals as an accessible document specialist and a certified professional in web accessibility. I'd like to thank the Northwest Higher Education Accessibility Technology Group for facilitating this opportunity to speak with you all regarding Portable Document File, or PDF, accessibility basics. This session is the 5th in a 6-part series meant to provide you with a baseline understanding of document accessibility best practices. Speaking of accessibility, before we get started, I'd like to make sure that today's webinar is as accessible as possible to all attendees. Everyone intakes and processes information differently, so visual narrated presentations may not be everyone's cup of tea. With this in mind, please feel free to access and download an HTML version of this slide deck, including all links and references, by navigating to bit.ly/PDF-A11Y-basics with a +, or by using the QR code on your screen. You're welcome to reference these materials during this morning's webinar or keep them as a takeaway reference for further study. You may have noticed that the provided link does not take you directly to the presentation slides. The addition of the + to the bit.ly URL is a security measure that allows end users to verify the link destination via an intermediary bit.ly landing page before proceeding, just so y'all know that it's not a phishing attempt. Finally, while there will be dedicated time for questions at the end of the presentation, as Gloria shared, I welcome questions throughout and will respond when feasible. So let's get started. As the decorative digital content authoring illustration on your screen suggests, any capacity building or training activity should begin with the what, the why, and the how. Let's start with the what, PDF accessibility. Regardless of which content authoring tool we use to generate our electronic documents, they are often converted and distributed as PDFs via our websites, learning management systems, and email. We've discussed in previous sessions in this series that not all content authoring systems are capable of producing accessible content. And those that are, like Microsoft Office and Google Workspace, require conscientious accessible design in order to ensure that the resulting assets themselves are fully accessible and that the accessible markup translates effectively through the conversion to PDF. So why? Why do we need a whole presentation that focuses solely on this one file type? The short answer is that PDF accessibility is hard. It requires expertise and practice. The longer answer is that we work in higher education and PDFs aren't going anywhere. As much as we'd love to experience a shift toward more accessible and sustainable HTML content, non-HTML electronic documents in general aren't going anywhere, and they shouldn't necessarily. They represent a convenient, more permanent and portable digital asset that is easily transferable and intended for both digital and print distribution. But PDF accessibility is hard. Validation requires a professional PDF editor. Remediation requires a professional PDF editor. And remediating an inaccessible PDF is not easy. I'm very sorry, folks. If you were hoping for good news in this presentation, like a quick fix or a magic wand, I recommend HTML. So how? For those of you who have attended previous sessions, this will come as no surprise to you, but the answer is capacity building, folks. I won't auditorily describe purely decorative images in my presentation, but I will describe the one I included here. In previous sessions, I included an illustration of a person lifting weights with stylized document authoring kettlebells on the floor beside them. My intention was to point out that most of us have already been lifting document authoring hand weights, so to speak, for at least a few years. Leveling up to heavier weights, applying digital accessibility best practices simply builds on something that we already have practiced doing. Today, however, we're talking about PDF accessibility. Most digital content authors do not have experience using a professional PDF editor or PDF editing software. And even if they do, they haven't necessarily used the tools necessary to validate accessibility or remediate an inaccessible document. So today I've included a different illustration. It's an illustration of a crane lifting a beam at a construction site. Because while you may have lifted weights, you likely haven't operated a crane, but you might be able to operate a crane effectively with a license and appropriate training. Speaking of licenses, you like that transition? Let's talk tools. Professional PDF editors. I won't go too far into detail on this, and to be clear, I'm not recommending a specific product. What I will share is that a professional PDF editor is necessary, and not just for the built-in accessibility checkers that may give you a boost along the way, but spoiler alert, are not enough. Primarily, you need a professional PDF editor like Foxit PDF Editor, Adobe Acrobat Pro, Equidox PDF accessibility software. They're listed on the screen, low to high in order of current costs, of which I'm aware. And you need a professional PDF editor. Again, cheapest to most expensive, Foxit, Adobe Acrobat Pro, and Equidox to manually validate accessibility. And there's other tools out there. The ones that I very personally and not in any professional capacity recommend. Often I'll recommend Foxit because of the price. It's a lot less prohibitively expensive for a yearly subscription than Acrobat Pro. But people also tend to have more experience with Adobe products. And so it tends to be a sort of cost and time effectiveness conversation with departments regarding what tools are made available. So let's talk method for validating accessibility. First of all, is the text selectable? We're jumping right in. You open up a PDF. Someone just drops a PDF on you. Before you get started, you need to assess the scope of your work. Was the document scanned? Is the scan bad? You know the ones I'm talking about. Maybe like a crooked scan, or maybe there's some dust, or maybe a hand in the scan. If so, first, is there a more accessible version available through your library? If not, does this document require optical character recognition in order to have recognizable text? Depending on the color and typography choices that were made in the original design, there may be only so much you can do to make the document screen reader accessible, but not fully accessible. If you have access to the original document, form, or presentation, depending on the complexity of the document, it can be considerably more cost and time effective to recreate or repair the document in Google Docs, Microsoft Office, or Adobe InDesign, rendering the conversion and validation process in a professional PDF editor substantially easier. This is likewise the most sustainable option in terms of long-term resource management, since any subsequent updates could be made to the original document, and then republishing and validating as an accessible PDF would be relatively easy. But let's say that's not an option. There's nothing you can do in the tight turnaround, and you need to make this document screen reader, if not totally visually accessible. You start by ensuring that the text is programmatically recognized using your PDF editor scan and OCR options. For the purposes of this presentation, all screenshots will be from the PDF editor that is likely most familiar to you, Adobe Acrobat Pro. The screenshots on this slide show a section of a PDF flyer where a heading and subheading are selected. Global Accessibility Awareness Day, Digital Accessibility Basics Workshop. There's likewise a screenshot of the left-hand scan and OCR panel in Adobe Acrobat Pro, showing a selection to recognize the text in this file. Next, you have your review and remediation checkpoints. I like to break these up into standard PDFs and PDF forms, which require some additional validation criteria. So for standard PDFs, you're really thinking about 4 major things: properties, reading order, alternative text, and tag structure. For PDF forms, you're additionally thinking, so it adds on to it because you still got to think about those first 4 things from standard PDFs. But for PDF forms, you're also thinking about field labels, required fields, tab order, and then spoiler alert, you're going to have to circle back and look at tag structure again. So let's break that standard PDF checklist down. First, properties. Your primary directives here are to, number 1, include a descriptive document title, and number 2, assign the correct document language. There's other properties that can be helpful, but these are the 2 that are going to be most important for screen reader and other adaptive technology navigation. Likewise, for ensuring that your document is read aloud correctly by screen reading and text-to-speech software. I've included screenshots on this slide showing the description, file, title, and author fields under Adobe Acrobat Pro document properties, and the reading options for binding and language fields. So next, reading order. You must ensure logical reading order for all content. And for those of you who were in previous sessions, you remember this is something that is fairly straightforward in accessible document design. Accessible presentation design, it can get a little bit trickier. And y'all may have noticed in some of these slides that we're going through that there's a couple of different boxes, and I've visually arranged the screenshots and the labels in different places for emphasis. I had to spend a lot of time on the front end after creating these slides to be visually appealing or accessible to ensure that the programmatic reading order also made sense. In fact, for this slide, visually, if you're looking at the slide, it says number 1, validate, and it has a screenshot that supports that heading. And then it has another screenshot, and below it, it says number 2, repair. It's kind of a nice staggered visual representation of my main points. But reading order, I had to make sure that number 1, validate, showed up auditorily before the screenshot, and number 2, repair, auditorily showed up before the screenshot associated with it. Reading order is going to be even trickier when we move into PDFs, which is why that accessible design piece is going to be so important when you have the opportunity to engage with the original. For those of you who have some familiarity with Adobe Acrobat Pro, you may know that your right-hand side menu is customizable. That means that you may or may not have seen or heard the option to view the reading order of content and reorder or fix tags. The symbol looks like kind of a Z, representative of left to right, top to bottom reading order. Your first step, validate. Are the items in the reading order side panel in the correct order? If not, they need to be reordered. Your second step, repair. If there are items that have not been recognized at all, they're not showing up in the reading order, or maybe they are showing up in the reading order, but they were recognized incorrectly. You can select prepare for accessibility in the left-hand side panel and subsequently select fixed reading order to open the reading order dialog box. This is one of your most powerful tools for fixing broken reading order, and another spoiler alert, for fixing inaccurate tags. In the reading order dialog box, you are able, with that open, you're able to draw a rectangle around misrecognized content and select a new tagging option. So some of you may be wondering if this is an unfamiliar process to you. Is this process, remediating an inaccessible PDF, a fully accessible process? It is not. The methods for remediating an inaccessible PDF, you'll notice you're hearing things like drag a box over, or you're reading the captions and you hear click or right click. And that is because a substantial number of the remediation tools in Adobe Acrobat Pro, Foxit PDF Editor do require the use of a mouse. Next, we have alternative text. Y'all already know that we need to ensure appropriate alternative text for all non-decorative images. There are a couple of ways to validate and remediate alternative text or alt text in a PDF, but I've found that the easiest method is to do so while you have the reading order dialog box open. Again, a very powerful tool. With the reading order dialog box open, you can right click, there's that inaccessible mouse only option on an image with a mouse, and edit alternative text or edit alternate text in Adobe Acrobat Pro. In the case of the screenshot on this slide where I have a world globe illustration selected, I've added the words world globe in the alternate text field. And I'm actually going to go back to that slide because I want to point out, I briefly touched on accessibility checkers at the beginning. And often when I present on PDF accessibility, folks anticipate that we're going to kind of focus on how do we use the accessibility wizard. I'm not going to cover how to use the accessibility wizard in Adobe Acrobat Pro or Foxit PDF Editor or Equidocs or another PDF editing tool today. And the reason why is because they're pretty good at walking users through how to use them step by step, but they're also imperfect. They're checkers, right? And so automated checkers are going to be able to tell you if there is missing alt text. They're not going to be able to tell you if it's bad alt text. It's why the manual check is so important. All right. Your alt text for a given image, someone may have given you a PDF and the alt text is WG_12 &.jpg when it should be world globe. So accessibility checkers, I find that they're a really great sort of first and last step. Help me catch the really big things, right? And then I'm going to go through and do all my manual checks. And then I'm going to run it again and just see if maybe there's anything it's capturing that I may have missed. Finally, for standard PDFs, we have tag structure. You must ensure accurate tag structure for accurate headings, lists, links, tables, table headers, and so on. Similar to the option to view reading order, the option to add, delete, or edit accessibility tags is available to include in your right-hand side menu, but it is likely not there by default. The symbol looks like a small upright tag. And again, the actual element itself is called add, delete, or edit accessibility tags. This is where the money is, folks. Well, no money, but it is where you will find the fruits of all the accessible design work you hopefully were able to put into the original document to which you hopefully have access. If the original document was designed with appropriate heading structure, list structure, descriptive links, accessible tables, that will be reflected in the accessible tags menu. Here, the tag order is important, but also the tags themselves. If something was not tagged appropriately, so maybe you're going into your accessibility tags and you find that the title for the flyer, it's actually start showing up tagged as P for paragraph, basic text. That's supposed to be tagged as an H1. So there's a couple of different ways to fix tags. All of the professional PDF editors have really some pretty great documentation on how to go in and repair tags. Ultimately, you can repair some of them right there in the pane. But also, again, that beautiful reading order dialog box is going to be your best friend, because being able to use that fixing reading order as an option to repair a section of text by re-tagging it using the options in the reading order menu. Righty. Okay. We are pushing through because we have a lot to talk about. So let's talk PDF forms. Field labels. I won't go too far into detail regarding how to prepare a PDF form in general by auto-detecting fields or manually inserting new fillable fields. Most PDF editors have excellent documentation on this topic, and this is more likely one of the areas in which you all may have had some experience with Adobe Acrobat Pro or some other PDF editor. Basically, it comes down to this: validating your PDF forms. Include unique descriptive tooltips that duplicate field names exactly. Under the General tab in the text field properties for a given field, add a descriptive matching name and tooltip. This applies to any unique text fields, checkboxes, etc. And by default, often when folks are validating PDF forms for accessibility, they're maybe visually going through their fields and they're saying, hey, there's some form labels here. This is good. I can see that there's a field label that says participant email address. Great for the screenshot on the screen. But that probably means, or at least very possibly could mean, that there has been a field name associated with the label. You've got to go into the properties and validate that there is a tooltip, because the tooltip is what most screen reading software is going to read out loud as folks are tabbing through those actionable elements. I should note too that the group name and tooltip for a series of radio buttons should likewise reflect relevant information from the associated question. And there's some great documentation for this for most PDF editors. And I assure you, for each of these areas, this is kind of your, let's say this presentation is your study guide. You know the things you need to do. So now you can go forth and research how to do the things you need to do in your given PDF editor of choice. So ensuring that there are unique descriptive tooltips, duplicate field names, ensuring that those exist is going to look just a little bit different in each given accessible PDF editor. So you want to make sure that you're following the directions associated with the tool you're using. One more thing about radio buttons. Oh, the unique choice for each radio button must be specified via the Options tab in your text field properties. Okay, required fields. This one is pretty simple. Clearly indicate any required form fields. Again, it's going to look a little different depending on the PDF editor that you are using, but in Adobe Acrobat Pro, this means selecting the required checkbox under common properties for a given field. And Finally, I warned you we were going to come back to tab order. You thought you were done with order validation and remediation. You are not when you're dealing with a form. After selecting prepare a form from your left-hand side panel in Adobe Acrobat Pro and remediating any of those missing or inaccurate tooltips, you will need to also ensure logical tab order for each fillable form field in the right-hand fields side panel. And likewise, you're going to want to validate the position of each field in the right-hand tags side panel, where the fields fit in with the remainder of the reading order, which by now will be like an old friend, your tags panel. You'll have spent lots of time in there, or like an old enemy, depending on how you're currently feeling at this moment about PDF accessibility. Okay, so let's recap. And if you're thinking, 10:27, and we're already talking about recap, the reason why is because I want to make sure that we have maximum time for Q&A for PDF accessibility. It's a tricky one. So first, optical character recognition, or a brand new, more accessible PDF. Regardless, for standard PDFs, once you make sure that text is recognized, properties, reading order, alternative text, and tag structure. And for PDF forms, field labels, required fields, tab order, and then a quick circle back to tag structure. Okay, before we move into questions, alternative options. Anytime you're looking at a surplus of PDF content, which is always when we work in higher education, you need to ask yourself these questions. Number one, do we need this PDF at all? If not, archive it. No more digital hoarding, folks. Number two, should this PDF be a web page? The answer is probably yes, unless there is a clear business purpose to have a digital asset that can likewise be distributed in print. Should this PDF be a web form? Again, the answer is probably yes, unless there's a clear business purpose to have a form that can be filled out both digitally and in print. If you ask yourself all of these questions and there is still a definitive purpose for having a printable digital asset, which, don't get me wrong, is often the case in higher education, then you ask, can we remediate this PDF in-house effectively? Do you have the tools, the skill, and the ability? If not, should we contract with a third-party vendor? If there are significant accessibility issues in your document, form, or presentation such that timely in-house remediation is unfeasible, it may be more cost and time effective to hire a third party. There are several third-party accessibility consultancies and service providers who offer paid remediation services. And I'm seeing some comments in the chat from Anna. I'm finding that a lot of the PDFs I'm currently remediating are having issues with alt text for links as annotations and bounding boxes issues. Apparently, some things don't transfer over from Word natively, and Adobe isn't always catching it. PAC 2024 has been finding the little things. I'm noticing that Oregon State is doing a great job turning their PDF resources to web pages. Yes, I love that. Absolutely. 100% the most sustainable long-term option for dynamic, accessible, inclusive, usable content is to really be asking ourselves what the business purpose is of the PDFs that we are posting and distributing over the course of our jobs. We really need to be thinking about, should this be a web page? Should this be a web form? Should I be using a more accessible form or survey distribution tool like Qualtrics or Google Forms? And there's some great comments. Yep, complex tables, 100%. Anna says also, I hate complex tables, LOL. And yes, 100%. And it's one of the things that we talked about. It's a limitation of document accessibility that is not necessarily a limitation for HTML content when you have the appropriate markup access. Because with documents, if for those of you who were in the session on document accessibility and presentation accessibility, The content authoring tools to which most of us have access do not have the capability of marking up a complex table accurately. So that means that the tables that we include in documents need to be simple tables. And what that means is one header row, one header column. You cannot have merged cells because there is no way for you to scope a merged cell to the appropriate header row or header column cell without having access to HTML markup. So when you get a PDF with an intense complex table, even if the document was designed with accessibility in mind in an accessible content authoring tool, you are now going to have to retroactively do what is very similar to HTML markup in the tags panel in your PDF editor. And it is difficult, and difficult is putting it mildly, because it can take hours and hours and hours. There's a comment in the chat. Let's see. Thanks for the shout out from Sagan. I'm assuming Oregon State. And then Justy says, also, should this be directly entered into the LMS instead of a PDF? Yes, we love learning management system HTML content. And we're also seeing academic software companies become even more and more proactively accessible. There's been amazing progress in the last several years with Desire to Learn, Canvas, and several other learning management systems. And 100%, when someone asks me, should this be a PDF or should it be an LMS landing page or an LMS module? Should this be a PDF or should it be a Qualtrics survey? Should it be a PDF or should it be a web page? If you're asking the question, it should definitely be HTML. Couple of more comments. Elliot says universities can collect a lot of PDFs from graduate students, like PDF dissertations that end up in open online repositories. Any advice for getting accessible PDFs from folks like grad students? Capacity and awareness building. This is huge. The biggest movement for the needle on digital accessibility maturity in any given organization is making training available, ideally required, for anyone who's generating digital content that is going to be disseminated and shared on behalf of the university. And those things, when we talked about document accessibility, accessible design in Microsoft Word and Google Docs, the tools that graduate students are using to build their dissertations, one of the things we talked about is that folks are doing the same actions they've always been trained to do, inserting an image, using columns, putting in lists, and we're simply asking to do that a little bit more conscientiously. If I put in an image, add my alt text. I'm going to be putting chapter structure, hopefully, in my dissertation. My master's thesis was 3 chapters, so it's had its title, it had its heading 2s for its chapters. Looks like Sagan added a comment to graduate students. This is basically the collection that prompted my question. Yep, I've been there. They are so bad in so many ways. Absolutely. Dissertations, theses, the working closely with your library as well, your library collections folks, to develop guidance for the development of open educational resources, which is often the category in which theses and dissertations fall. Kimberly replies and says, I've been pushing for students to get training on how to make their documents, posters, and slides accessible. Many of them will go on to work at institutions that will have to worry about this stuff anyway, might as well learn it now. Kimberly, you are this is the work. This is what we're here for. It's one of the reasons why that capacity and awareness building, the further that we can push that at our institutions, if our computer science basics programs are teaching basic accessible code design, if our freshman composition courses and our public speaking courses are touching on accessible design, this is going to go really far. I mean, how many folks, student employees end up eventually working at a higher education institution, so teaching our student employees. Jessica says, for ones we already have, wouldn't copyright issues come into play for how much we change a thesis or dissertation? or other things such as university extension publications, PDFs. That's another conversation that you want to have with your library. There can be a really incredible partnership with the open education resources sort of standards that your library puts in place for the materials that are made available through your university. Kimberly says this is in terms of content. When we're doing the tagging, that's not altering the content, so copyright should be fine. And that is correct. If you are going in and you're remediating PDF for accessibility, you're not going back and messing with the original, but you're going in and doing all of those steps that we talked about for standard PDFs and for PDF forms. You're not actually changing the content or the visual look of the PDF. In fact, the document will look more or less the same unless somebody goes in the back end to look at the tags. You're essentially, it's sort of like messing with the code on the back end of an HTML page, but you're not messing with like the CSS. You're adding alternative text to a link tag that was already there, that kind of thing. Elliot adds, and then do we spot check when the grad students submit? There's a couple of different methodologies. A lot of libraries and other departments, web content management departments in universities will respond to, first they'll put text in a submission. So whatever form or method by which people submit things, say under our university's policy, et cetera, things need to be accessible. Have you checked your document for accessibility per these guidelines with a required checkbox, right? Someone might just check it anyway, and then they submit it, in which case then you could respond and say, ooh, did a little spot check and it looks like we might need a little bit more PDF remediation. Here's some resources. We'd love to support you if you have support available. But of course, a lot of us are running 1 or 2 person shops. And then Alice adds, if this intervention step, accessibility check, is implemented as a part of the publishing process. Oh, see, Alice, you anticipated me. Then there may not be copyright issues, for example, with the library or with the department or committee approving the dissertation. Let's see. Oh, Sagan said something that can wait until the end. So I will go past it. Kimberly, unfortunately, I've come across issues with reading order cleanup where content ends up disappearing, hiding behind other aspects of the document. Often it's difficult to correct for this. So that is true. If you are moving around reading order, all of a sudden something disappears. And that is likely because of a, excuse me, of a white background object, for example, excuse me, in the PDF. So that is fixable. First you fix the reading order, most important thing, right? And then you go to edit PDF, and then there's layering. So you can move layers back and forth in your PDF, and then just make sure you go back to validate reading order and ensure that the corrected reading order remained as you moved layers, because the layers aren't always directly attached to the reading order. Justy says, I work with faculty. Should I mostly recommend providing the actual PowerPoint rather than the PDF version for course content or presentations? 100%. It's going to be more navigable, more accessible. If I say if, but most of the time when academic faculty say, but oh, my presentation notes, my speaker notes, this is like my intellectual property. I've poured my heart and soul into that. If the speaker notes are something that an instructor or a designer wants to keep private, it's very easy to make a copy of a PowerPoint or Google Slides and strip the speaker notes and share it that way. Honestly, Google Slides, it's even easier than that. You don't actually have to make a copy and strip the speaker notes. You can share the HTML version, because my speaker notes are messy. And I try to make sure that all the primary content is right there on the slides. So I share the HTML version. Sagan says that's been their strategy. Suka has a question.
Um, this is a little bit, it comes back to your forms, and it's relevant because I had someone ask this question this morning and it brought up some questions for me. But when we are working with PDF forms, every now and again, we need to have an e-signature on there. And in most forms, the date field comes after the e-signature space. But I was thinking about it this morning, and I seem to remember that once someone uses e-signature, it locks down, it makes everything read-only. So in that case, when you're setting your reading order and setting your tab order, is it better, even though visually the date field shows up after the e-signature form, is it better to have that date form previous to the e-signature space in the tab order so that they don't e-sign it, lock it all down, and then can't fill out that date space?
I think that depends a little bit on what tool you're using to collect signatures. Because that answer will be a little bit different depending on if you're using if you're just using straight up like Adobe Acrobat Pro, people are using the actual document, or if you're using because I think that would be more of an issue in that scenario. When you're using programs like Adobe Sign or DocuSign, and I should also note, this is sort of the asterisk when we talk about any software, that not all e-signature tools are created equally in terms of accessibility. But DocuSign and Adobe Sign do tend to be relatively accessible, you know, a couple of workarounds, unfortunately. And typically, if your university or organization has a contract with an e-signature tool, then the fillable stuff is filled out and then the document is sent out for signatures. And so that doesn't really matter because the date's already filled and it's time to sign. And the document is still readable, which is the problem with some other e-signature programs, that the document is not even read-only when it's sent out.
Yeah, I've seen it strip everything out of there.
Yeah, but if it's the PDF itself, that's a little bit tricky. It might be an appropriate workaround depending on the situation to flip the reading order so the date is read first. But I think that would really be only in a situation where the document is being distributed by itself, like through email and not through an e-signature tool.
Yeah, and I think that this, I have to dig in with them a little bit, but it seems like that's what this group is doing. So we'll see, but thanks for that perspective. Yeah, the other thing that I just wanted to mention, because a lot of the questions that are coming up came up in we run a accessible community of practice for accessible content creation every week, and it's generally folks from academia in that group, but we had 2 people outside of academia yesterday, and one thing that came up in terms of format, whether it's PDF, HTML, Word documents, is just the acknowledgement that outside of academia, not everyone has the same easy access to even things like the internet outside of that space. So we're dealing with a number of kind of highly rural spaces that we sometimes revert away from HTML purely because the access is different for them. So it was just a good reminder from them that I think, you know, I'm in academia, we get so kind of set in like, this is how it is. Everyone has high-speed internet. Everyone has access to Acrobat and Microsoft and Google and all of those things. It was a good reminder for me.
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why I mentioned that in higher education, sometimes it is often the case that you've got a definitive business case for using a digital document versus an HTML page. I'm also a really big advocate of building transferable HTML. So one of a document that I recently was working with, it started as a PDF and was actually running some experiments with generative AI to see how how well, if at all, AI could support conversion. And one of the use cases in which it can is that I wanted to create an HTML resource that could be opened in a browser, but I could also just send it to someone, right? And it can be read offline. It can be, just open it in a browser. It doesn't matter if you have internet, as long as you have a digital device. And I, taking untagged, like an inaccessible PDF and turning it to HTML. It's a lot of coding. Would take me a minute. So I was hanging out with my, with Gemini, and I said, all right, I don't know what you're capable of doing here, but I've run this thing through OCR, and I want you to give me accessible semantic heading structure in an HTML version of this. I want a linked table of contents at the top. I'd like you to look up the acronyms in the document and find what they mean and put them in the document and put the acronyms at the end in parentheses. Basically, I'd kind of taken a scan of the document and seen like what needed to be taken care of, and I sent it through. What was then turned out to me, the block of code, I would not distribute that to someone because AI is augmentative, not a solution. It is a tool, not a solution. So I then review it with my subject matter expertise in digital accessibility, and I was like, "Ooh, Gemini, so close. You have a linked table of contents, but the links aren't underlined. They're indicated by color alone, and they're also just like." They're just sitting there. Could you put them in a list for me? Thank you. Also, it got 6 out of 8 acronyms, so I had to manually look up the other 2. And I said, hey, these are the actual ones for the others. Good job on the 6 ones. I don't know. I'm very polite to AI because AI scares me. But
there's been some good articles about that recently. Why we should continue to be polite.
Yeah. So then I sent it right back, and it came back, and I was like, ooh, so close. You're almost there. And I can see in the code that you made each of those items in the table of contents. You put them in list item tags, but you didn't actually make them part of a list, which is, required for the code to work. So after 3 tries and 30 minutes of hanging out with AI, it actually turned out some HTML that I would have been comfortable sharing with someone. But so in the end, as a tool, writing all of that code from scratch, the HTML and the associated CSS, would have taken me several hours. Mostly because I'm not like super skilled programmer. So I'm sure it would actually take a developer a little bit less, but it would still have taken me a few hours, and it only took me 30 minutes. So all that to say, that was a huge rabbit trail from saying that there's also ways to distribute offline HTML. I want to make sure I'm paying attention to the chat here. Suzanne says, I remediate mini PDFs, usually a scan of an old print paper that is to be added to our institutional repository. I think we can all feel you there for sure. But I hesitate to add alt text for images and figures. I don't want to just repeat the text in the image label, but I don't necessarily have knowledge on the topic or time to read the paper to figure out the context of the image. I'm going to read the next comment before I respond to that one because it's very relevant. Sagan says, going back, I would argue that adding alternative text is changing the content because you are explaining the context and meaning of an image without authorial input. We make sure we label all content we do this on with a statement specifying who wrote the alt text. I'm adding the word who because I think that might have been what was meant there. And this is really relevant. What we want to think about remediation in kind of 2 different categories. So if you are coming to this session as a disability services professional or a human resources professional, and you're thinking about accommodation, you're thinking about reactive remediation is what I call it, right? There is a person with a disability who needs an accessible version of this, and it was not designed or posted accessibly in compliance with the organization's policy. So we got to go in and fix it after the fact. That's the kind of time when you really don't have the opportunity. I mean, if you do, great. Like if it's for a course and you're in direct contact with the instructor, for example, and you have an opportunity to engage with the author, great. But most of the time you don't. And so you are altering the content. And so I love that solution of adding a statement that says, alternate text has been added for purposes of accessibility, inclusivity, and usability for people using screen reading software, et cetera, et cetera. But for proactive, you're working as a university to meet accessibility guidelines. You've got this pool of PDFs. You're going through and deciding which ones can we convert to HTML, which ones can we send into the archival abyss. And that's when you want to be thinking about, hey, can we engage with the authors? Can we engage with the department? I spent 5 years as an alternative formats coordinator, and things that I've seen, the art history textbooks that we've converted to accessible formats. Engaging with a subject matter expert or the author to ensure that you are appropriately representing the context and function of the image and not simply a description is huge. Kayla says, do you recommend converting PDFs to HTML in the program or another way? I'm not sure that I completely understand the question. Kayla, do you mean in the program, in a given academic program, or using a professional PDF editor?
Like Adobe Acrobat Pro or something.
You could try. You could try, but you would probably need to edit the HTML a little bit. Without answering that question, to answer that question definitively, I'd probably have to run a couple of tests, because I've never used a PDF editor to generate HTML. If I did, like with any conversion, right? A conversion from PowerPoint to PDF, a conversion from PDF to HTML, you need to manually validate. And so you'd probably need to, at minimum, open the HTML file in a browser, validate it with screen reading software, make sure that things translated appropriately. And if they didn't, you'd need to edit that HTML in as a TXT file in like Notepad, for example. And before it's then posted somewhere else. Alice says probably best to start with the original source file if you can access it. And that is always the right answer. Alice added, sometimes storage is a limitation as well for some organizations, for example, server storage for websites. What are your thoughts on saving an accessible web page as an HTML file as opposed to a PDF, so that accessibility can still be better than PDF? Storage of the files can be housed elsewhere, for example, Google Drive. I know there are some challenges because sometimes it downloads an entire package, but I'm trying to think of alternative solutions where some may have storage limits. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, and I was just going to say, for context, it's a little bit different from some of the earlier conversations. This is, me thinking about someone, like our institution, our website. It has a whole bunch of files and content within it, but we can't utilize it as a storage, like a repository. So we have to host all of our documentation elsewhere. And so I'm trying to think of, if we were to try and convert certain things that are PDFs into web pages or HTML, is it, your opinions on, if we have PDFs and we convert them to HTML, sometimes they download as packages. So if you were to host it on a website, but maybe just allow them to be able to download the packages, but the pros and cons with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there are storage issues associated with your web server and you want to archive content, it sort of depends on what you want to archive from it. If you're looking to archive like the text content itself, then folks will sometimes pull that, have a repository of Google Docs with the content so they can reference it when they're creating new content. If it's the design that you want to pull, then absolutely pulling an HTML file is appropriate. And if you want to be like less confused later when you're referencing it a few years down the road, it can be helpful to clean up the HTML in a TXT file first to get rid of maybe some extraneous CSS or other code that's not necessarily directly relevant to the design that you want to share. There's a couple additional comments, it looks like, up above in terms of converting PDFs to HTML. Sagan says that their process is to use Abby to convert a PDF to TXT with manual OCR correction if it's bad. open the TXT file in Word and edit, add headers, alt text, etc., then export to either HTML or EPUB as desired. Abby Fine Reader and OmniPage, a couple others, they're the super optical character recognition tools. The built-in optical character recognition in your PDF editors is going to be only so good. And so that's why often going back to the original is potentially necessary. Oh, and looks like the poll is up, so I should mention that. It can be a little bit difficult to get a department to purchase more complex optical character recognition tools, but if they're available, yes, especially in an academic department that's designing STEM content, you want to be thinking about not just a more not just a more robust optical character recognition tool like Abby, but also an optical character recognition tool that can recognize math and STEM content, something like MathPix or Equatio. Sagan adds to export to HTML. I use Pandoc, which is a command line program to export to EPUB, and I use Daisy. Both of these are free. We have an alternative format specialist in our midst, folks. Alice says sometimes story, although we already talked about that. Speaking of forms, 2 minutes. What is your take on the accessibility of Qualtrics versus something like Microsoft Forms? I am a huge fan of using native editors for a given process. If you're trying to create an online survey or form that collects information, using an online survey or form tool like Google Forms, or a lot of folks use OnBase, although, well, there's some accessibility issues with that one, but Google Forms, Qualtrics, like any authoring tool, accessibility of the end product depends on how conscientious your accessible design is on the front end. There are some question types that are more accessible than others. And so engaging with the Qualtrics accessibility checklists as you go through and ensuring that you're designing with accessibility in mind is going to get you something really accessible. It is 10:59, so I'm so sorry. I'm not going to be able to get to the rest of the chat questions, but bring them to the practice session in 2 weeks.
Yes, I put the link in chat. We'll get hands-on. I think some people are talking about how difficult it is to change order and add tags and this and that, and I'm sure we'll be going over some of that at the next session. So please join us for that one if you are available. Thank you, everyone. There was a question from Jeffrey.